Chapter 71. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper scans Chapter 71. Danger approaches, to the Ur Tunnel, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, looks like the Leshen gave you quite a bit of trouble, Letho. Roy was worried. Letho was still looking listless, even after resting up for days, obviously still affected by his wounds. The wounds are fine, boy. I just took too much of the potion, and it bit me in the arse. You'll run into the same problem after you become a Witcher, Letho explained patiently. And don't poke your nose in Scoia'tael's war against the dwarves ever again. We'll leave Mount Carbon after attending the banquet tonight. Roy nodded. If his memories were correct, the Mahakams never fell to anyone, so Scoia'tael would fail even if Roy and Letho did nothing. Even so, the thought that an extremist group like that had been snooping around Mount Carbon and the Mahakams to plot a conspiracy didn't sit well with Roy. Has Scoia'tael become Nilfgaard's lapdog? Are they helping him hear Var Emreis now? Roy mumbled to himself, but he tossed the questions aside, since he couldn't do anything about that as of yet. Then Letho asked him another question. You're forgetting something there, boy. I need an explanation. How did you and your friends manage to take the Leshen down? There were 2 spellcasters there if you include that Leshen joining the mix. The Dimeritium bomb I gave you should only be enough to take one down. I have the Child Hunter's vomit, remember? The thing you hid in your dimensional pocket. What dimensional pocket? Roy averted his gaze in an attempt to hide his secret. I'm not stupid, boy. Your stuff keeps vanishing and reappearing without a trace. Even an idiot would know something was up. Letho was confused. But there's one thing I don't understand. How do you manage to use a dimensional pocket when you can't even control the elements? I've never seen anyone with that power before, excluding the sorcerers, of course. Roy puffed his chest. I knew you'd see through me eventually, so I'm going to tell you my secret, right now. Prophetic dreams aren't my only specialty, I can even send anything I touch into my inventory space, and I can use them anytime I want. You don't have to lie, you know. Everyone has their secrets, Letho said solemnly. Fine, keep your secrets then, but remember who you are, and never do anything that'll hurt the Viper School's reputation. Of course. The truth can be the best lie sometimes. A short while later, a dwarven servant gave them 2 sets of clothes for the banquet, and Letho started teaching Roy how to behave like the people in high society. He straightened Roy's clothes out and flattened the creases on Roy's back gently, his gaze tender. But when Roy finally wore the striped jacket and the pair of tight, yellow leather pants, all he could feel was something gnawing at his skin, and he felt itchy all over. Damn, this is some shit fashion taste. Why'd the dwarves have to take trash as fashion? Letho chided, stand still. Don't jump around like a monkey. Roy stiffened, and Letho took a trip down memory lane. I looked just like you the first time I wore those clothes. I hated them, but I came to understand one thing, our school can't revive without the help of those in high society. The peasants and civilians see us as mutants, heretics, and barbarians. All they offer is discrimination and non-acceptance, but they fear authority. If someone at the top of the food chain shows us their support and clears our name, the people will eventually accept us. Roy was surprised that a veteran Witcher like Letho would think that way. Asking for high society's help. Is that why they accepted him here Var Emreis recruitment, and assassinated the emperors in the north? But it's useless. Those guys aren't on the same level as Witchers. They're too high up, so there's no way they'd walk a mile in the Witcher's shoes and listen to them. Witchers are but disposable tools to them. And Witchers are few and far between. As if that isn't trouble enough, feuds always happen between different schools. If the Witchers really want to end the discrimination against them, first they must end the feuds and work together. That's the only way to grow stronger. Roy had a lot going on in his head, but he pretended to listen to Letho anyway. You'll have to get used to all these formalities, whether you like them or not, Letho advised, but then a guest came in, uninvited. Seville the wine dealer was still as fat and as resplendent as ever, and he nodded at Letho and Roy. "Hello, Letho." "Hello, Roy. We meet again. How are you doing?" "Fine. Real fine, actually." Roy crossed his arms, glaring at Seville coldly. "Thanks to your recommendation, we went for some great sightseeing around Mount Carbon." Letho patted Roy's shoulder, stopping his grumbling. "And what brings you back to Mount Carbon, Mr. Seville? Will you be joining the banquet tonight?" Seville closed the door seriously. "I came to help you guys. Danger approaches." "Danger? Oh, you mean the Les Hen?" Roy snickered. "Too late for that. We killed it and the Scoia'tael members." "No, no, no." Seville shook his head, pleading genuinely, "I'm talking about the banquet tonight. You have to come with me right away. My uncle is going to trip you up tonight, to say the least." "What?" Seville pointed out the odd things that were going on around in the plaza, and when Letho and Roy looked around, they did find something weird. The patrols should have been lessened after the Lucian's death, but that wasn't the case. Instead, more guards were patrolling the valley in standing sentry. The crossbowmen and archers were stationed at all the high vantage points, obviously defending against something. Even the patrols around the streets had doubled, though they'd pretend to smile and salute the Witcher and his disciple when they went past them. That fact made Letho think the dwarves were trying to defend against something worse than the Les Hen. "Do you see? Elder Brovar set everything up to keep you guys from escaping. If you tried to run away, they'd have shot you without hesitation. Wow. After all we did to get rid of the menace plaguing his city, this is the thanks we get. A goddamn trap." Roy's face fell. "Brovar's one ungrateful bastard. I'm not going to forget what he did to us. Never." Letho looked calm, but his clenched fist was a sign that his fury was going to explode. On the other hand, Seville looked awkward after hearing his leader getting mocked, but he forced a smile. I think he crossed the line this time too." He observed them carefully and changed his tune. "But if we put this matter aside, he's actually a fair leader. If looks could kill, Seville would have died 100 times right then and there." He gulped. "But he isn't planning on breaking his promise. He has prepared your reward for killing the Les Hen. It's a rare weapon, a sword called Gwhyr. It had been crafted by the gnomes prior to their exodus. Once he gives you the sword, the request will have been completed. Since he would owe you nothing, that'd give him an excuse to execute you." "Ah, classic. They say force is the last resort, but it seems your kind leader reaches for it the first chance he gets." "I see. So he's planning on giving it to us, killing us, and then taking it back." "Oh, that is so smart," Roy mocked, though he thought it was a shame he had to let the weapon go. He'd managed to read an old article by chance, and it was one that talked about Gwhyr. It was the best sword in the world, the magnum opus of ancient gnome blacksmithing. It could cut through steel like butter, and anyone who wanted to buy it had to fork out an astronomical sum of money. Only gnomes can make that kind of weapon now. Their blacksmithing is top-notch, but it's a shame they've moved to Tyr Tochair. It's just what I need. If I can get it. Seville sighed, breaking Roy's train of thought. "You shouldn't have killed Cerwyn, not even if it was by accident. Yes, he did collude with the Les Hen in the murders, but that doesn't change the fact that he was Elder Brovar's only son and heir. Cerwyn Hoger was his illegitimate son." Roy was reminded of the rumor Dave had told him. He'd thought it was just a joke back then. Yes, he was, but Elder Brovar never admitted it, because it was a shameful past. Even so, everyone in Mount Carbon knew that. It's an open secret, actually. Seville pinched his beard. "Haven't you noticed that they look alike? It's like they're twins." Elder Brovar's getting on in age, and he can't really sire another child now, so of course he'd hate you. I mean, you killed his only son. We can't stay here any longer, so come with me. But where can we go? Roy looked around at the heavy defenses. How can we escape? The worse the crisis, the calmer they must be. Letho and Roy went back to the guest room and kept everything in Roy's inventory space before changing into some casual clothes. Then they went to the cellar with Seville, but to their surprise, their journey went smoothly. A little too smoothly. You did take the less hen down and help us out a lot. Nobody's going to stop me from taking you guys to the cellar. I am a wine dealer after all. Seville's cellar was astonishing enough, but it was nothing compared to Mount Carbon's. It was as vast as the ocean, and words failed them. The only light was from the candles littering the place, and all they could see was unending darkness, as well as wine barrels as far as the eye could see. The barrel stacks were as tall as hills, and they were neatly categorized by their age and type. When Roy took a look, he noticed that the youngest wine was already at least 10 years old. The aroma of alcohol and wood wafted across the air, and Roy felt tipsy just by taking a whiff of it. He felt everything around him turn into clouds, and his mind started spinning. Letho, on the other hand, caressed the barrels, looking captivated by them, since he loved wine a lot more than Roy did. Eddie, guys, you can have the wine whenever you want. Let's get out of here first. Seville snapped them out of it and dismissed the guard before continuing down the cellar. They came to the end of the cellar 15 minutes later, and a black brick wall stood before them. Much to their shock, Seville climbed up the barrel beside and rummaged around, and then two dull thuds were heard. A moment later, the wall slowly retracted and revealed a dark tunnel leading to Melitel knew where. Roy peered into the tunnel, and thanks to his high perception, his night vision was superb. The walls were grayish-green and uneven, though there were extinguished oil lamps hanging on the wall at intervals. The ground extended downward at a gentle incline, leading into the darkness. Cobwebs and insects filled the tunnel that seemed to have been abandoned for years. What's a tunnel like that doing here? We call it Smyak. Before the fortress of Mount Carbon was erected, this tunnel was abundant with ores. The most abundant of all, actually. It was pivotal during the early years of our establishment, and its contribution was immeasurable. Seville gazed at the tunnel with respect, and then he sighed. But ever since all the ores had been mined, this tunnel had been abandoned. If you walk straight ahead, you should reach Temeria by going through the Mahakams. Walk west for a few days and you'll reach Elander. Roy stared at him doubtfully. How long has this tunnel been abandoned, old chap? Is it dangerous there? 50 years, I guess, so maybe there's something dangerous in there, Seville said honestly. But if you don't want to take the risk, you can always stay back and face Elder Brovar at the banquet tonight. Maybe he'll change his mind. Seville only had respect and fear whenever Brovar was mentioned. Roy turned to Letho, looking excited to go. What say you? Should we take the risk and face the unknown danger in the tunnel? Or should we hang back and expose Brovar tonight? Letho stared into the darkness, murder welling in his eyes. Why should we attend a banquet when the host doesn't welcome us? You ready, boy? You might have to pull your own weight this time. Let's do it. Roy clenched his fist, and Gabriel, which was sleeping in his inventory, trembled when it felt its master's excitement. Roy's only regret was not having the chance to bid goodbye to his friends. Seville, tell Reagan and the boys I said goodbye. Sure. Here's food and water. Seville pulled out a big sack quietly. I don't think this much will burden Roy. Hold it. Letho turned to Seville, looking at him weirdly. I need to know something before we go in. Seville took a few involuntary steps back when he noticed Letho's murderous aura, as if a predator were glaring at him. I don't understand, Letho. Do you think you can get away with it? We're not going in without answers, so tell the truth. Seville saw them off and scratched his head as hard as he could. He felt like someone had erased something from his mind, and no matter how he tried to remember, nothing popped up. Not important. Elder Brovar's waiting for me to get back to him. He reset the wall and left the cellar. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 72. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper scans Chapter 72. Sword and Corpse, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. The wall behind them rumbled and closed, blocking their way back, leaving them with no choice but to push forward. Smyac was a narrow, winding tunnel that could only fit 2 people at a time, and because of the long years of abandonment, the tunnel started wearing down. Any slightly bigger movement would make debris fall, and one would worry about the whole place caving in on them. Letho and Roy treaded forward carefully, and a few turns later, they came to a brightly lit clearing. There, a sheathed sword was quietly leaning against the wall. Looks like Brovar held up his end of the bargain. This recon is worth it. Letho managed to find out about the truth after casting Axii on Seville earlier. Turned out Brovar wasn't exactly trying to make enemies out of them, but at the same time, he didn't want to see them again because of his son's murder. He ordered Seville to lead them to Smyac for some monster killing. At the same time, he was trying to vent his fury on them. As for the banquet, well, the dwarves would have a lovely time. Letho didn't care about it, nor did he want to attend a banquet where he wasn't welcome. Roy changed his opinion about Brovar ever so slightly after he saw the sword, but Letho scoffed. You give him too much credit. The only reason he gave us this was to maximize his own gain. But having this sword is going to make getting through this place easier. Roy went up to hold the handle, but the sword's weight almost dragged him down. He took a deep breath and yanked the sword out of the sheath, revealing a blade of perfect craftsmanship. The blade was gleaming blue, and it was weirdly humming with joy after being released from its sheath, as if there were a spirit sealed within it. Roy held the handle with one hand, while the other supported the blade. He tilted his head and looked parallel to the sword. Then he held the crossguard with both hands and pinched it. The blade was smooth and gleaming, and the crossguard had gorgeous engravings on it. The handle was just long enough to be held with both hands, but the sword was also usable with one. Its length was halfway between a long sword and a one-handed sword. The sword's body didn't have any grooves, but instead the ridge was protruding, strengthening the sword. The part connected to the crossguard wasn't sharpened, so Roy could hold it without a glove. That opened up more options for him in battle, and the tip of the blade was the shape of an isosceles triangle. Roy loved the sword, and a message popped up in his job interface. You have obtained GWIHYR. You may bind this steel sword to you. Do you wish to bind GWIHYR to you? GWIHYR type. Steel sword materials. Black iron, lava, meteoric iron, pine wood, and body parts from powerful monsters. Details. The sword weighs 3.06 pounds, and its handle measures at 9.3 inches, while the blade comes in at 36 inches. A spirit dwells within. Circulation. Heals the user for a small amount of stamina after every kill. Do you wish to bind the sword? Yes. Right after that, an invisible ripple pierced through Roy, electrifying him, and he could feel a connection to the sword he was holding, as if it were an extension of his own body. When he closed his eyes, he saw another item that gleamed blue in his consciousness. Roy had a feeling he could feel where GWIHYR was no matter the distance between them. He held the sword for a while, immersing himself in its beauty. When he was done admiring its beauty, Roy reluctantly handed it to Letho. It would be a waste to keep the sword by his side when he hadn't learned anything about swordsmanship. I'll lend it to you for now, Letho. As long as Letho had the sword with him at all times, Roy would know his location no matter where he was. At least they wouldn't get separated then. Letho took the sword carefully and placed it at eye level to make a close observation. What he saw surprised him, for Gwyhr was perfect in every aspect relative to his own sword. Brovar gave this sword to me, boy. I don't remember giving it to you. Well, what's mine is the school's, Roy said sheepishly. And the same thing the other way around. Don't sweat the details. I've bound it to me, so a mere thought is enough for me to take it back. Letho's eyes twitched. You can't use this, and I think we know why. There might be some tough battles ahead, so I'll be using this for now. He tied the sword to his back, and it gleamed alongside his own sword. I should teach you about swordsmanship once we get out of here. They went ahead, feeling slightly at ease. Letho was leading the way, raising a torch above his head, while Roy took the rear, crossbow in hand and ready to shoot. Half an hour later, they slowly came to a plateau, and the tunnel was widening. Finally, they jumped down a ledge and arrived at a huge cavern. It was man-made, and a few tunnels were spread out on the wall before them. There were decayed stone altars in the cavern, and the ground was littered with hose, broken tents, and clothing. The oil lamps and extinguished sconces hanging on the walls spoke of the cave's former glory, now reduced to ruins. Ores of different colors were buried in the walls of the cavern, and some of them were glowing a hauntingly beautiful blue. Letho picked one up and fiddled with it, and he clicked his tongue. No wonder they wanted us to explore this place for them no matter what. Abandoned mine my arse. This is a rich mine, one with immeasurable value. No, wait. Something stinks. On the other hand, Roy tripped while he was lighting up the torches. He looked down and was shocked to see the thing that made him trip. This is a corpse. A corpse rolled out from the fallen tent, and there was barely any flesh left on it. Roy could almost see the whole skeleton. Letho put the oar down and checked the corpse without complaint. This mine is a lot hotter than Mount Carbon, or it wouldn't have decomposed at this speed. But this guy probably only died last month. What are you trying to say? Letho answered solemnly, those bastard dwarves sent other humans aside from us on recon missions in Smyak. No, they sent them to their deaths. So Brovar is just coexisting with humans on the surface. Roy found it unacceptable. He sees humans as nothing more than exploitable tools. We are different species after all. It's not beyond him to see us as nothing but cattle. Letho went on with his observations, ignoring Roy. A human male. Probably around 30 years old. Right calf and left arm were torn off, and he was disemboweled. There are some bite and claw marks on his neck. Take a look, boy. Roy hunkered down to check the corpse, and he quickly scanned through his memory to see if there was any possible monster that fitted the bill. Judging from the wounds, the killer must be a necrophage, but which one? Look to your left. Letho pointed at Roy's left, and the boy peered in that direction, and he realized there was a blue fungus there. Long rube. Remember what I told you. The things that appear in a place are usually the weakness of some particular monster. Roy's eyes shone. Longrubs can be used to concoct necrophage oil, so we're dealing with ghouls here. No, the wounds don't look like they were caused by ghouls. We're facing neckers. The moment he said that, a loud screech came from one of the tunnels around them, stopping Roy's train of thought. Prepare for battle. Let's see what this sword can do. Letho stood up and held Gwyhr with both hands, and then he swung it forward, causing the air itself to hum from the slash. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 73. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 73. Necker's Approach, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, a hideous creature, crawled out from the cave, gurgling. It looked humanoid, but its limbs had sharp claws, and its skin was wrinkly and dark. Its muscles were engorged, and it was naked aside from the piece of tattered cloth covering its crotch. Its eyes were as big as saucepans, and they had no pupils. Its teeth were long and disgustingly yellow, forcing its mouth to stay open. The flesh beneath its chin and neck extended down to its chest, not unlike the jowls of the elderly. Necker age. 5 HP, 60 stats. Strength. 5 dexterity. 5, strength in numbers +1, constitution. 6 perception. 4 will. 4, strength in numbers +1, charisma. 2 spirit. 3 skills. Corroding venom level 1. Neckers live in places teeming with corpses and decaying flesh. Thanks to that, their claws are imbibed with a special venom that can weaken its target, causing the target to heat up. Strength in numbers, passive. Whenever neckers move in packs, they gain +1 in dexterity and will. Evolve, passive. Once a necker has consumed enough flesh over time, it will evolve into a necker warrior. The necker screamed at Letho and Roy, and then it crouched and pounced at them from the ledge. Letho charged ahead with his sword in hand. He cleaved through the air with GWIHYR, and the gleaming blade sliced through the necker like butter. The monster was sliced in two at the waist, and blood spurted from its wound, flying ahead as its body fell with a thud. Despite having killed a necker, only a single drop of blood trickled down the blade, and it still remained gleamingly clean. "That's a gnome-made sword for you." Roy praised it silently, and he aimed his crossbow at the remaining neckers that were coming from above, and then he pulled the trigger. The bolt soared through the air, but he could feel the lines that connected him to it. For some reason, he could feel the speed, trajectory, and how long the arrow had flown in the air. He knew if he could hit the target the moment he pulled the trigger, and as expected, all the necker could do was screech as the arrow pierced its head. "You killed a necker. EXP +20. Roy reloaded his crossbow and glanced at Letho. GWIHYR was humming with each swing, as if a battle-hardened spirit were singing in joy. Letho took a step forward and kicked the third necker before chopping its head off in one clean sweep. The three neckers were killed in moments, but the battle was far from over. One necker is easy to deal with, but 5 is going to be dangerous, while 10 is fatal. "Looks like we came across a necker nest, huh?" Roy looked up and saw a group of 4 neckers crawling out from the tunnels before them. They were gurgling and baring their fangs at Letho and Roy, and if it weren't for the fact it was a dangerous situation, Roy would have laughed at the way the neckers were running. They were hunched, and they waddled like ducks to a pond. Despite their weird way of charging at their prey, they were moving faster than an average human, and there seemed to be no end to them, much to Letho's chagrin. "You'll have to look out for yourself. This is going to be a tough battle. You too." Roy went up the slope behind them and took the high ground. He activated crossbow mastery, and coupling that with massacre would increase his damage by 20.5%. One shot to a necker's vitals would be enough to send them to hell. On the other hand, Letho stayed in the same spot, facing the neckers head-on. He quickly cast Quen before hunkering down and pressing to the ground. The purple circle of Erden glowed, slowing the necker's onslaught drastically. Letho lunged ahead and slashed upward, slicing the necker before him into 2 halves, its blood spraying into the air. Then he stepped back, staging in Erden's range, and he slashed down diagonally, disemboweling 2 neckers at the same time. The neckers kept crashing down on him like waves, but Letho was like a reef, unmoving and stable. He was the first and last line of defense. Then 3 neckers came at him at the same time. He took a deep breath and turned more solemn than ever. He loosened his left hand's grip on the handle and tightened his right's, and then he lunged ahead with his right foot and spun around, slicing the chest of a necker open. Once the revolution stopped, he backed off into Erden's range and spun counter-clockwise, finishing off the remaining couple of neckers. Letho repeated the same attack, and it was as if the blade had become a hunter's net before him, killing the neckers no matter how many of them tried to attack. Moments later, the neckers' attacks slowed, and there was an empty space before Letho. He heaved a sigh, loosened his grip, and then tightened it again. Letho spun his numb elbow and cracked his neck. His leather armor was already covered in blood, and he was starting to get tired. His arm would throb when he moved because of the wound that hadn't fully healed up yet, and a necker found the opening. It clawed at Quen, making the shield dim considerably, but Letho quickly replenished it, though more neckers were coming at him. One of them got lucky and was only injured by the blade. It pounced on Letho's shoulder, but an arrow then pierced through its head. Roy was still on the slope, firing down any neckers that escaped Letho's attacks, and none of his arrows missed. His EXP bar grew fiercely, gaining 100 EXP in 2 minutes, level 3 Witcher, 430/1500. His heart was pounding within his chest, his blood roaring in his head, taking his excitement to a peak, and Roy was in the zone. His limbs almost caused afterimages to appear because of how fast he was in reloading, and then he pulled the trigger again. The arrow flew ahead, filled with the strength from the crossbow, and also his soul. The bolt tore through the air like lightning, and the neckers were too slow to react. A moment later, one of the monster's head had a hole in it, blood and gray matter flowing from it. But the bolt didn't stop at one necker. It pierced through the chest of another, destroying its heart, netting Roy nearly 40 EXP. And then dizziness washed over Roy. When he snapped out of it, one necker was already a few feet away from him, the stench of its breath almost palpable, and its claws aimed for Roy's chest. If the attack were to connect, Roy would be killed or gravely injured, at the least. Even so, Roy didn't show any fear. His eyes gleamed crimson as he cast his new skill, Fear. The necker stiffened up and lost control of its body, as if hit by a sledgehammer. Roy easily dodged the attack and shot a bolt through the side of its head. You killed a necker. EXP plus 20. Roy held up his crossbow and laughed to himself. Looks like I'm not totally useless in close-quarter combat now. Letho managed the melee combat, while Roy took the stragglers out with his crossbow. The Witcher cleaved through the neckers easily, while Roy kept firing his bolts, taking out the neckers with terrifying speed. 5 minutes later, not a single necker was left standing, and their bodies were strewn throughout the cavern. Some lost limbs, some were cleaved in half, some had holes in their vitals, but none died a good death. The bloody Witcher and Roy were sitting back to back among the bodies, the boy panting heavily. That's GWIHYR for you. It slices through the neckers' bodies and bones like nothing. I can feel a weird sensation coursing through me every time I kill one of them. If it weren't for that healing effect, I wouldn't have lasted as long as I did, but you did spectacularly too, boy. Letho took out his wineskin and gulped some liquor. Some of it trickled down his chin. Looks like the fight with the less hen helped you quite a bit. He tossed the wineskin to Roy. Roy accepted it and drank the dwarven liquor. Some color returned to his face, and he felt liquid courage bubbling within him. We should work like this more. Letho gave him a look of approval. Rest up. The real battle is still up ahead. I bet there are necker warriors in those tunnels, so don't let your guard down just yet. Roy gave it some thought. I killed 10 neckers just now, netting 200 EXP, and now my EXP bar is 530/1500. Necker warriors are more dangerous than their normal counterparts, but that means the EXP gain is better too. For some reason, he thought Brovar Hoger was a great guy for sending him on the recon mission. It was exactly what Roy needed to level up and grow as a Witcher. Seems like we're staying here for a bit. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 74. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 74. Poison and Mutagen BDNVL.M, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, Letho's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. He was still recovering from the copious amounts of potions he took in the battle against the Less Hen, and the wounds he sustained were still healing. The tough battle earlier took a lot out of him, and coupling that with the necker's venom made his condition turn from bad to worse. He leaned against the wall, looking more listless than ever. It took all he had just to stand up, so he had no choice but to sit down. Roy felt guilty seeing Letho in that state. He wouldn't have been in such a bad condition if Roy was a bit stronger. I can't fight in this condition. Letho sighed. He'd never felt so weak in years, and he was showing it to his disciple. For once, he looked crestfallen. Rest up and don't push yourself. We just cleared a whole horde of Neckers. They need time to regroup too, so I don't think they'll attack anytime soon, Roy said, consoling him. At the same time, he took out some food and water from his inventory space, sharing a meal with the Witcher among the dead bodies. Then he tended to Letho's wounds with alcohol and marigold potions. Letho observed him in silence, feeling proud of his disciple. Roy might have thought he was improving at a snail's pace, but Letho didn't think so. It hadn't been more than 3 months since they'd first met, but Roy had already grown from a village bumpkin to a fighter who'd faced off a few types of monsters. He could fight them face on, and even a less hen died by his hands. Sure, luck might have played a part, but that was still an astounding resume. Letho had never seen such blistering improvement before, not even from the best disciple in Letho's time. The moment he had that thought, Letho had more hope about the Viper School's resurrection. That may be true, but that's no reason to let our guard down. Look around and see if you can get any comfrey, wolfsbane, and longroob. These herbs can grow in caverns too. We don't have any alchemy items with us, so we can't make any potions or decoctions or bombs, but we can make some simple poison. One that can fuck these bastards up. What kind of poison is that? Roy peered at Letho curiously. You never told me you could make poison. I'm from the Viper School. Of course I'd know how to make poison. Letho shook his head. But most monsters are immune to poison, so it makes no difference. Just focus on alchemy for now. Letho sounded reserved about poison, as if he didn't want Roy to dabble in it. Roy nodded, pretending to agree, but he had a different idea. Poison might be useless against monsters, but they're great against humans. This knowledge could prove useful. He went around the cavern and managed to scavenge a lot of herbs. Wow, this cave has everything. Roy managed to get everything Letho asked an hour later, and he even found some rarer ones that couldn't be found easily outside, like blood moss and moliero. He took some of everything and kept it for future use. Paralyzing poison works well against them. First, crush the comfrey, then extract the juices of the longroob, and then, the cavern was brightly lit by the torches, and Letho, with Roy's assistance, brewed some paralyzing poison, the one that was the trademark of the Viper School. Ingesting it or injecting it through an open wound could numb a monster's limb and nerves, paralyzing them. It was much better than what the butcher's powder could do. They worked together and quickly processed all the herbs. Then Roy took out a bowl from his inventory space and mixed the materials at a specific ratio, and then he stirred them. At the same time, Letho was teaching him the skills involved in the poison's brewing. Eventually, Roy felt accomplished about the poison he was making. It was a different high from the one he got from the monster killing. It took them a while, but eventually, they managed to make a bowl of dark green, foul-smelling paste. It's rough around the edges since we don't have any tools, but it can work. Letho checked the paste and put it beside him. Now for the last step, the 6-hour wait. But they couldn't waste 6 hours on nothing. You got more space in that dimensional pocket of yours. It's not a dimensional pocket, but whatever you say. Roy stopped correcting him. Yeah, it's got loads of space. His inventory space doubled after his job change. His space was packed before that, but half of it was still empty at that moment. Good. These corpses might be ugly, but they aren't trash, I guarantee that. Letho scanned the corpses and handed GWIHYR to Roy so he could cut off a Necker's head. Then Letho calmly split the head apart with his short sword and rummaged within the sticky insides. Roy felt disgusted. Is this some kind of high-end brain massage? A short while later, Letho took out a green, hairy elliptical item that was the size of a thumb. Lucky. He observed the item closely, his eyes gleaming. First body, and we already got a mutagen. Is that a green mutagen? Roy was surprised to see something he was familiar with appearing before him. Yes. A lesser one, but it's indispensable in the trial of the grasses. It can slightly increase a witcher's life force and toxicity resistance. Less than 1 in 10 normal neckers have a mutagen within them, Letho explained. Now that we're touching this subject, you ought to know that mutagens are split into 3 types. Green, blue, and red. And they're further split into lesser, normal, and greater. The stronger a monster is, the higher the probability of us getting a good mutagen. The green mutagen that's necessary for the trial of the grasses increases your life force and toxicity resistance. Blue mutagens buff the signs, while red mutagens make you more agile. Of course, the better the mutagen, the stronger the buff. Ah, so the mutagens strengthen constitution, spirit, strength, and dexterity. He stared down in ponderance. How many kinds of mutagens does our school use in the trial? All of them, but in different ratios. Letho explained, 1-to-1 for red and green. Blue's the least. In other words, Viper School's trial of the grasses would lean their increment toward strength, dexterity, constitution, and toxicity resistance, and at almost the same rate. Spirit saw a lesser increment compared to the first few, while the others showed little to no improvement. To put it simply, Viper School witchers leaned more toward close-quarter combat and alchemy tools in battles. I see. No wonder Letho's strength, dexterity, and constitution are all over 20. No wonder I couldn't see through the stats. Roy was then reminded of a relatively villainous school, the Cat School. Cat School witchers were renowned for their phantom-like reflexes and extraordinary swordsmanship. They probably only have red mutagens in their trial so they can put everything in strength and dexterity. Glass cannon melee, huh? What about the Lushan's mutagen then? Roy knew Letho managed to extract a blue one from the Lushan's corpse, but he didn't ask. Letho knew what he was thinking about though. Probably using it to make a less hen decoction, or turn it into a greater mutagen for the trial. Helps with the mana, see. I'll give it to you if your will and constitution make the cut before the trial. Roy was delighted to hear that. Wait, does that mean different witchers of the same school will show different levels of changes after the trial? Is it because of the quality of mutagens used in the decoction? Yes. Letho noticed Roy's excitement, so he calmed him down. But the greater the reward, the greater the risk. Greedily chasing for more power is just going to make the trial all the more lethal for you. Stay calm. Roy thought about his full recovery passive. I wonder. That's it for the trial for now. Letho pointed at the sea of corpses around them. See if you can get some green mutagen from them. It's fine even if they're lesser ones, since they can be merged and strengthened anyway for your trial. Roy went back to his roots in this case. He imitated Letho and split open the skulls of the neckers, rummaging through their mushy insides. The gray matter, blood, and flesh squelched as he moved around. He felt disgusted, for monsters smelled fouler than the livestock he'd had to deal with back in Caer. However, he managed to keep his composure and swept through the corpses thanks to his will. After going through 30-something corpses, Roy only managed to get 3 lesser green mutagens. He put them in his inventory, but before he could even catch a break, Letho was already pushing him to another round of dissection. Neckers are really valuable. Their hearts are indispensable in many decoction recipes. Cut them out and let them dry. Their lungs, liver, pancreas, and kidneys can be used in alchemy in some weapons forging. Those parts can add additional effects to some of the stronger weapons. Of course, the best of them will come from the leader of the Neckers. Letho stopped for a moment. Sorcerers use their eyes, ears, and tongues in their experiments. You can make a tidy profit by selling those. Don't forget about their claws and teeth. Once we get out of Smyak, we'll get a decent blacksmith to make arrows out of those. You'll find them to be better bolts than the ones you usually use. Oh, and their skin too. Roy suddenly turned around to stare at Letho, his face plastered with blood. Letho felt a chill running down his spine, and he told Roy, "I can see your pockets full." "Right, we can forget about the skin. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released." Chapter 75. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 75. Killing the Neckers, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. The cavern was filled with dismembered corpses of Neckers when Roy was done with them. The boy's clothes, pants, and leather armor were drenched in blood, and even his face was caked with clumps of flesh. He tried taking a whiff of his scent, and all he could smell was the stench of sweat and blood. He wanted to clean himself up, but Letho stopped him. "Don't waste any water, boy. We're going to be here for at least a week. Every drop counts." The Witcher was wiping his sword, and he was in the same situation as Roy. Letho looked more like a bloody butcher than a dignified Witcher, but he didn't mind. "I can take the stench, but at least let me wash my hands." Roy thought about having to eat his meals with his hands caked in flesh, and that disgusted him. "Do as you wish." Letho turned around and went back to his sword. "Necker blood is worse than horse piss, but at least you won't die from thirst." "Alright, I get it." Roy relented. Thirst was a more pressing matter than hunger, and that made water all the more valuable. "Fine, it's just a week. I'll take it." "Honestly, you look more like the part now, boy," Letho commented. "You can't call yourself a Witcher if you can't handle some stink." He wanted the boy to accept the circumstances more easily, so he gave an example. "Have you ever heard about Zuggles?" "I've seen that in your notes. It's a type of necrophage that looks like ooze." Roy got distracted and said from memory, "It gorges on decaying flesh, corpses, and waste products. They live in sewers, swamps, and places that are humid and squalid. I have a story to tell." Letho frowned as he recalled one particularly bad memory. "I was 20 years old back then, just graduated from Gorthurgvade. There I was, exploring the world in my hunt for monsters and fame. It was a tough journey, but eventually, I got a request. My quarry was the Zuggles living around Alba. I tracked them down, of course, and know what I saw. Heaps of decaying, bloated corpses and the shit of every living being you can think of. And also mountains of waste products that oozed poison. The whole place was just one big stinkhole filled with putrid water." Letho looked disgusted. The stench was unbearable. Even a shithole would be better than that place. "Did you jump into that stinkhole then?" Roy noticed something, and he just had to feel smug about it. Letho closed his eyes melancholically. "I had to. I managed to kill the Zuggles and complete the request, but no matter how many times I bathed, the stench just wouldn't come off. No woman would come near me for a whole year." "A whole year?" Roy was stupefied. "That stench lasted for a whole year. Technically, Serret and Ox can still smell it until today." "Oh God." Roy stiffened up, and suddenly the stench of the flesh on him smelled a lot better. "I wasn't the exception. I've run into nearly 10 Witchers in my life." Letho continued, "All of them are elites of their school, and all of them have had to jump into a Zuggle nest before." Roy had a bad feeling about what was to come, and Letho confirmed it. "I think every Witcher has to go through that rite of passage once if they want to grow." Letho gazed at Roy. "You should jump into a shithole once to train yourself if you can't get a Zuggle request." "Alright, I get it." Roy shouted, stopping Letho from telling him any further tales of the past. He was already feeling uneasy from the story. "I'm not going to waste any water, so stop it with the shithole. There are still some Necker hearts left. I'll deal with them." Letho stared at Roy quietly and smirked. Since they couldn't tell morning from night in the cavern, Letho and Roy made quiet estimations and took watch in shifts. Eventually, they had already spent a day in Smyak. It had been more than a week since Roy had had his first potion, so Letho administered the second dose. The pain wasn't comparable to what he'd felt with the first dose, and Roy endured it quietly without passing out. He suffered no side effects, though he sweated buckets, and his muscles felt sore. He then meditated and woke up feeling refreshed, as if the pain the day before had just been a bad dream. At the same time, the blood and flesh caked on him had congealed throughout the night. Letho moved around to see how much strength he'd recovered. His stamina was all back, and the wounds from the Necker fight were starting to heal, so he could move around no problem. He told Roy, "Take GWIHYR and chop up 3 corpses. Chop up." Roy was getting fearful of the Witcher's ideas. "Are you trying to feed the flesh to me?" "No, but I won't stop you if you want to try. Save it for yourself." Thanks to Massacre, chopping up a small humanoid corpse was an easy task for Roy. He cut the corpses into fist-sized clumps of meat and split them into 4 packages kept in the tent cloth. Their paralyzing poison had congealed and been slathered onto the swords as well as 3 of the packages of meat. Letho took the last package and poured it all onto Roy, covering even his hair in the rancid flesh. "The fuck?" Roy was surprised, to say the least. "What the fuck is this?" The flesh smelled worse than the feces in a shithole, and Roy started roaring, but then he came up with a possible reason for Letho doing that. "Alright, I know what you're trying to do, but at least warn me next time. This is one crazy plan." The meat was placed outside one of the tunnels, and they crawled into it. It was narrow and shabby, made out of nothing but mud. Letho had to curl up and move forward in an awkward pose that resembled how a Necker would move. Since Roy was around 5 feet 5, he could move freely in the tunnel, and from time to time, he'd touch the walls of the tunnel. "I wonder what's on these walls. It's smooth, bouncy, and warm." He mumbled, "I have a feeling we're walking through a monster's mouth, and deep down there is its stomach. Can this really work?" "Shut up. I can't keep you safe this time if we can't fool those bastards." They moved ahead, and then they looked at each other. "It's coming," they thought, and they hunkered down, holding their breath. Quiet footsteps came from ahead, and a Necker appeared from the corner a moment later. Its ears were pointy, its head bald, its teeth sharp, but it had something normal Neckers didn't: red paint on its face. It was crawling ahead using all its limbs, not unlike a spider, but Roy was reminded of Gollum. Necker warrior age: 8 strength, 6 dexterity, 5 dov co-constitution, 7 perception, 4 will, 4 charisma, 2 spirit, 3 skills. Leap attack level 2. Has great leaping ability, allowing to attack from 10 feet away. Can leap toward its target quickly, attacking it with its fangs and claws. Gains +1 in strength when leaping. Lasts 30 seconds. Corpse venom level 4. Lives in places filled with corpses and decaying flesh. Thanks to that, its claws and fangs are imbibed with venom. Its attacks can weaken its target and cause bleeding. Strength in numbers, passive. Whenever Neckers move in packs, they gain +1 in dexterity and will. Evolve, passive. Once a Necker warrior has consumed enough flesh over time, it will evolve into a Necker leader. The Necker warrior noticed their movement, and it stared at them in uncanny confusion when it noticed the smell of its comrade on Letho and Roy. They stared at each other for a few moments, and the Necker accepted Roy as one of its own and left. Roy kept his crossbow and took a whiff of the flesh on him. "I knew it. It thinks we're one of them. We can talk about that later. Let's get out for now. This is the right way, it showed up from there after all. Its nest must be near, so we can set up bait there." "Okay." They took out the meat from the package and backtracked, tossing the meat as they went. The bag of meat was laid out on the floor when they came out, and Roy heaved a sigh. Will they take the bait? They should know it's their brethren's flesh, right? Didn't you notice it yesterday? Those neckers were skin and bones. Obviously, this place doesn't have any food, and the neckers have been starving for a long time. They're going to take the bait. This is too much of a temptation for them. Humans will kill their own when they're dying from starvation, so why wouldn't these monsters? Why do you think this place doesn't have any beasts in it? Roy nodded. But I don't understand. How did we manage to fool them? Because of the flesh. Drowners can't see far, and the same goes for neckers. They rely on their sense and smell and hearing to see things, not their eyes. All they can see is an outline. Since we're covered in the flesh and blood of its kind, it should think we're one of them if we stay some distance away. Roy was impressed by the trick Letho came up with. The Witcher managed to turn the neckers' bodies into alchemy materials, camouflage, and poisonous bait. Even though he was wounded, he could still go against the monsters using his experience. I'm still too green. Books can't tell me about this, he reminded himself. I'm still wounded, so take GWIHYR with you. Don't let even a single one escape. They leaned against the cavern's wall. Letho was holding his steel sword, while Roy was holding GWIHYR. A short while later, they heard the rustle of footsteps coming from inside. Then out came a couple of neckers. They approached the meat curiously, sniffing it for a moment before devouring it. And then Roy heard the boom of footsteps as a group of pale neckers darted out of the cave to pounce at their food. The neckers gurgled in ecstasy as they crawled on all fours toward the meat, their putrid drool dripping onto the ground. The monsters licked the clumps of flesh and engorged on them greedily, oblivious to their bodies' changes. Thanks to the paralyzing poison, they were starting to become slower and slower, though they were still crawling out of the cave by instinct, for a bag of flesh was enticing them there. They stuck their heads out and looked down, ignorant to the danger about to befall them. Then they looked at their abnormally gigantic brother, in confusion. At the same time, Letho gave Roy a look, and the boy tensed, his fingers turning white. There's an opening. Roy took a deep breath and focused on the task ahead. He raised GWIHYR high in the air and sliced down with all his might, executing the necker before him. Blood spurted high into the air as the necker's head tumbled down to the heap of corpses, the last confusion still etched on its face. At the same time, Roy kicked the headless body away to keep the entrance clear. Roy started to sweat from his neck, and his face turned scarlet with excitement. Never knew killing a monster could be that easy. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 76. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 76. Nest, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, Roy executed 8 neckers and 2 necker warriors with unprecedented ease. Letho stayed out of his way and only dealt the fatal blow to the stragglers. He was trying to regain his strength. Once they were done, the duo went into the tunnel to finish the remaining neckers that had fallen for the paralyzing poison's effect. In the end, Letho's crude trap helped them execute 20 neckers and 5 necker warriors in less than 15 minutes. Aside from getting drenched in sweat and his hands getting numb, Roy sustained 0 wounds. A necker warrior would grant him 30 EXP, while a necker granted him 20. The massacre netted him a total of 550 EXP, and his EXP bar was at 1080/1500. I'll level up soon at this rate. His face was scarlet, his breath shallow. Letho gave him a glare and warned, "Don't take them lightly, boy. 3 neckers will spell the end of you with how you are now." "I see. I can kill one with my crossbow, one with fear, but I'll have to fight the last one in close-quarter combat." "You only manage to kill them easily because of the geographical advantage. This is an exception, not the rule. Don't worry about it. Roy nodded in calm solemnity. I was just thinking about something great. Not to burst your bubble, but stop dreaming now. The guards are all dead. That's the cue for our entrance. Letho led the way, and the duo went to the end of the tunnel, leaving the bodies behind. Eventually, they came to a clearing where all the crisscrossing tunnels congregated, and the tunnel that led deeper into Smyak was across the clearing. The duo searched the bodies and clothing around the place and managed to scavenge 100 crowns. They kept it in their pockets before bowing to the dead. We won't take your money for nothing. You'll have a place to rest in peace once we're done with our business here. Roy scanned the area and tensed up when he saw what was in the northeast area. A group of pyramids stood there, but they were made out of skeletons, and the tallest of them measured 2 feet. Every pyramid had at least 30 skulls, mostly from humans, dwarves, elves, and gnomes. Some came from small animals like mice and lizards. When the duo looked closer, they noticed the murky nacre fluid between the skulls that made the connection between them stronger. They were like some sick, crude, unfinished projects a madman created in an attempt to provoke. The empty holes where the eyes should have been spoke of unimaginable terror the owner must have gone through moments before their death. The Neckers did this. Why? To brag. Roy tensed up, his eyes gleaming with horror and anger. On the other hand, Letho stayed calm. Humans are just food for Neckers, just like how livestock is to us. Rule of the jungle, boy. Don't let it get to you. Remember, all you have to do is kill them. You're right. Roy took a deep breath and steeled his resolve to finish the mission. They're just EXP to me too. At the same time, Letho said, let's take a look. The nest should be there, and that's what we came for. The Neckers' nest was built like a weird underground beehive, and their inner side measured 3 or 4 feet wide, enough for a few Neckers to move in and out at the same time. Letho stepped on the nest and brushed against the bouncy, uneven exterior. Neckers would usually give some of their prey to the nest, even if it was their brethren. That provides nutrients for the nest so it can give birth to new Neckers. Like the amniotic fluid. Roy craned his neck to take a look. He'd always had the urge to pry a Necker nest open to take a look inside when he'd toss a bomb into it in the Witcher game, and his wish would be granted at long last. I wonder what's inside it. What he saw was a layer of black slurry squirming slowly, as if it were being stirred by an unseen hand. If Roy squinted, he could vaguely see a few pieces of decayed flesh floating on the surface. The stench smelled like rotten salted fish and feces that had been left under the sun for 2 weeks, but they didn't react to it, since they were already numb to the smell. The cavity above the slurry looked like the insides of a living creature. Roy could see veins throbbing rhythmically within the walls, and 2 Necker fetuses were sticking to it, connected by the umbilical cords on their bellies. The Neckers were greedily absorbing the nutrients from the nest, and they looked like human babies from the outside of the layer of skin that was protecting them. Their eyes were closed, and they were curled up in a fetal position. However, they were larger than human babies, and their skin was an eerie blackish green. Had your fill. Time for business. This nest is alive, isn't it? Just like how a queen bee would give birth to the young and command the workers to work. Letho took out the last bomb, Grapeshot. Yes, but I'm not sure if it's sentient. A lot of species had come to our world after the conjunction of the spheres. Many of them still remain a mystery despite our sorcerers' best efforts at researching them, even after a few centuries. Point is, new Neckers will be born in a week and run rampant in the tunnels if we don't destroy it. Roy took the bomb from Letho and shook it, and then he hesitated. There are 2 Necker babies in it. Do you feel pity for them? No, just wishing it'd be 20 or 200 instead. That'd make this a lot more satisfying. Roy thought about the pyramid that was made out of pure cruelty, and he slipped the bomb into the black slurry. Then, he hunkered down and covered his ears not a moment too soon, because he heard a dull roar a moment later. Reminds me of the time I tossed firecrackers into a fish pond. He looked up, and what greeted him was an eruption of slurry, limbs, and flesh. And then it rained down, spreading the stench through the air. Roy could vaguely hear a shriek of despair from the nest, and the skull that covered the surface squirmed for a moment before shriveling up like a raisin. Finally, it turned into dust, and nothing but a layer of skin remained. The nest burped, and smoke billowed. At the same time, Roy saw a message indicating that 110 EXP were added to his bar. So baby Neckers are worth 5, while normal Neckers are worth 30. Necker warriors are 40 EXP each, while the nest is 100. Level 3 Witcher, 1190/1500. He noticed the number of types of monsters he had to kill to rank up had changed from 5 to 7. So Neckers and the nest are 2 different types. He was looking forward to the next hunt. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 77. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 77. Explosion, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. Roy was squeezing a plump, green ball in his hand, the texture and warmth radiating from it making him feel like he was squeezing something erotic. Green mutagen, huh? The green mutagen was larger and deeper in color than its lesser counterpart, and contrary to its host's disgusting stench, it smelled nice, like flowers on a breezy spring morning. At least I didn't fight all this time for nothing. The nest they destroyed wasn't the only one in Smyak, or else the dwarves wouldn't have been so averse to it. Over the past couple of days, Letho and Roy had destroyed another nest that was home to 30 Neckers. The Neckers took up one territory for each tribe, as if by instinct. They didn't help or hinder any of the other tribes in the quest for survival, or it would have posed a great danger to Letho and Roy. If that were to happen, all they could do was run. Neckers are disorganized without a leader. Keep your wits about you and you'll have nothing to fear from them. Ever since they entered Smyak, Letho and Roy spent most of their time killing Neckers and only stopped for meals and rest. Roy was drenched in blood again and again, and even his face was caked in dried blood. He became leaner than before, but also more energetic and grown up. Aside from the green mutagen, the best thing Roy had gotten from the battles was his improvement in strength. His EXP bar was 1590/1500, and a plus sign appeared after the bar, but he wasn't in a hurry to level up. He decided to keep full recovery as a trump card in case things went south, at least until they escaped the tunnels. The intense battles also trained him in his control over his stats, and he felt a massive improvement on that aspect. Roy could only utilize half of his body's capabilities before that, but after the battles in the tunnels, he could use 60% of them. According to their schedule, they should have arrived at the heart of the tunnels on the 4th day. The duo noticed the complexity of the tunnels and the numerous routes they could have branched into during their earlier exploration. One misstep could have trapped them in for good, but the dwarves had drawn signs on places with many branches when they'd first dug the tunnels in case someone had needed it. Everything's fine. Letho stood before the tunnel, brushing his hand against the sign of 2 crossed hammers before a branch. That Necker stench again. Isn't there anything else in here? Roy was getting tired of killing Neckers, so he wanted to face a different type of monster. Pray nothing comes to pass, Letho said seriously. We've run out of bombs, oils, potions, and decoctions. If we come face to face with a djinn in this condition, your crossbow won't work on it, and I can't fight it alone, so all we could do is run. If we're unlucky enough to face a Garkin or cave troll, it'd be the end of us. Roy stopped feeling lucky, and they entered the cavern. It was smaller than the other ones, petite, even. It was too usual, for its walls and ground were bare. Nothing, not even a blade of grass or a stone. Something smells strange. Letho frowned. Roy took a whiff and noticed a strange smell coming from the nest, but he couldn't remember where it came from. When he looked ahead, he saw 5 grown Neckers wandering around, and a dried nest lay behind them. It's a mini-tribe. Most of the recon guys that had come from the cellar had been killed by the Neckers in the vanguard, leaving the ones in the rear without food. Starvation made them skeletal and uglier than the other Neckers. The Neckers screeched at the sight of Letho and Roy, thinking they were food. They foamed at the mouth and leapt toward the duo. 3 went for Letho, who was obviously bigger, while 2 went for Roy, who looked skinnier. Letho peered at them without mercy and faced them head-on with GWIHYR in hand, ready to kill, but Roy was quicker. His bolt soared through the air, piercing the head of a Necker, and it fell with a thud. You killed a Necker. EXP plus 20. The second Necker had closed the distance between them before Roy could reload. He could smell the Necker's bad breath and see its ugly, yellow teeth clearly, but Roy didn't panic. His eyes gleamed crimson for a moment and he sidestepped the Necker. The Necker jolted before freezing in surprise, thereafter losing all control and slamming into the wall before it. The cavern rumbled from the impact, and the Necker fell with a howl of pain. Roy took the chance to step on its back and jabbed a bolt into its neck, and then blood drenched Roy's glove. Nice. Letho protected himself with Quen and darted into the group of Neckers. He put his weight on his left leg and spun around, slashing at the Neckers' torsos. The Neckers were still baring their fangs at him, but they were already sliced in half from the waist down, their innards squelching against the ground as they fell forward. Even so, they didn't die on the spot. The Neckers dragged themselves ahead, their innards trailing behind them. They were determined to get a bite out of Letho, their desire for fresh meat overpowering their fear and pain. Resilient, aren't they? Roy fired 3 shots and filled his EXP bar even more. You killed a Necker. EXP plus 20. Level 3 Witcher, 1690/1500. And then all that was left was the nest, but Roy could only watch as Letho went to finish the job. He couldn't do anything without Grapeshot, so Letho had to finish it with Igni. The Witcher made a red triangle in the air and sent a jet of flame streaming toward the nest, and then everything shattered. Roy blacked out, his last memory being a bright light from Igni's flames. Eventually, Roy woke up, but everything around him was spinning, and the air was still filled with dust. His ears buzzed incessantly. When he touched his face, all he felt was something sticky. He looked at his hand and saw blood, but the worst thing was his whole body felt like it had been through a ringer, and his HP had fallen to 30 points. Shit. There must have been a lot of flammable gas in the nest, and Igni, well, ignited it. Fuck. How could I have forgotten what gas smelled like? He got up with difficulty, and then a terrifying thought occurred to him. Letho. Letho. Are you there? Talk to me. Shit. I got it bad even though I was some distance away. Letho must be gravely injured, at least. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 78. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 78. The Room Beyond the Dust, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. Roy heard someone cough on the other side of the smokescreen, and he ran toward the sound. Letho was leaning against the corner, his leather armor blown to smithereens. His arms, chest, and legs were scraped by the debris and charred by the flames, his face black with soot. He's a mess, but at least he's still alive. Their stock of potions had been used up, but Roy had 3 marigold potions left. Perfect. How do you feel, Letho? Where are you hurt? Letho rested for a while, staring at the smokescreen with fear. It's nothing. I think I broke a rib and some bones in my right leg. Damn. I never would have thought I'd almost die from my own sign. Roy was astonished that Letho managed to live when he himself was injured from that distance. You were really close to the explosion. Any other guy would have been blown to bits. If not for Quen, I'd be dead by now. Then he asked, wait, you're fine? Yeah, because I was standing far away. Roy wiped some blood from his ear and showed it to Letho. But I'm not unscathed. My whole face is bleeding, see? Yeah, I've never seen anyone still go around like it's nothing after sustaining that kind of injury. Okay then. The duo rested until the dust settled, but the cavern they were in had changed. The explosion hadn't affected the path ahead though. Instead, the left wall had caved in, revealing a weird room behind it. Whoa, a blessing in disguise, huh? Roy helped the limping Witcher into the room. It was the same size as a single room in an inn, but the walls were smooth, obviously renovated by someone or something. There wasn't any bed or furniture within, so there shouldn't have been anyone living there. But even if there was someone in there, the wall would have been blocked in the first place. In other words, there was no exit, making the room a death trap. Which dumbass built this empty room in this tunnel? Roy was disappointed. He thought they'd come across a treasure or something. It's probably a sorcerer's abode, Letho said. Only those who can teleport can come and go as they please. Roy helped Letho to the big, gleaming wall facing the entrance, and his necklace started humming the moment he touched it. Instead of the weak hum he'd felt when they'd fought the Neckers, the hum felt strong and invigorating. Something wrong with this wall. Roy brushed his hand against it like Letho had, but all he felt was a hard wall. We have to find out no matter what. A sorcerer put a spell on this, but luckily, I have some dimeritium powder left. Letho rummaged through his satchel and pulled out a handful of gray powder. It was the enemy of sorcerers and the material for dimeritium bombs, dimeritium powder. Letho sprinkled the dust onto the wall, and then the wall, not unlike soaked paper, turned a darker shade. The duo looked at each other for a moment before making their move. When it was fully soaked in dimeritium, ripples appeared in the center and spread out, revealing the mystery behind it, just like how a theater would raise its curtains. The duo observed the mural on the wall in silence. On the left, an elf with a crown was standing before his throne on the podium with his arms spread, welcoming his subjects that were kneeling before him. The mural felt cool to the touch, and then a ripple coming from it coursed through Roy. He trembled for a moment, and then, as if by magic, he found himself among the kneeling crowd in the image he'd seen. Roy looked up at the noble king above, who felt like an infinite ocean and an insurmountable mountain. Roy felt like he was just an insignificant bystander in the presence of the king. He snapped out of it a moment later and turned his eyes to the second mural. The elf king was in there too, but this time, he was swinging a crimson sword at a group of snarling invaders, while his sea of soldiers stood behind him. Those are humans, aren't they? Roy frowned. The invaders were built like humans, but they were depicted as snarling, repulsive creatures. What came next was a land drenched with blood and lit ablaze by the flames of war. The once glorious empire was reduced to rubbles, elf corpses strewn across the land, while the human executioners stood on top of the rubble, pointing their swords at the elf king's throat. The last mural depicted the elf king who'd lost his crown, and he abandoned his sword and shot an arrow at the sun above. The sun, injured by the elf's shot, rained blood on the land. It seeped into the ground, and mysterious plants broke through the soil and grew toward the sky. Roy fell into a long silence after he was done looking at the murals. Vivid depictions of war in all its cruelty popped up within his mind, as if by magic. Eventually, his eyes turned crimson, his breathing turned heavy, and he clenched his fists in hysteria. Letho gave him a tight slap, and Roy yelped. He rubbed his face that was starting to swell, and his eyes were clear again. You could have been gentler, Letho. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Letho gasped as his wound started to tear. You might have killed yourself if I slapped you even a moment later. So is this mural real? Roy knew about the world's truth, but he wanted to hear what Letho had to say about it. The murals tell of the history of the humans and elves, Letho said. The legends say the humans aren't the natives of this land. They'd come from the lands of yore and killed most of the ancient races here, including the elves. In the end, they finally conquered the world, but legends were just that. Legends. The humans have lived here for many generations, so maybe they've changed how history was written to hide the truth from everyone. It's hard to say who's right and who's wrong. Most humans don't think they've invaded the lands of the ancient races though. What do you think then? Roy asked. Me. Letho scratched his chin. Witchers aren't bound by their race. Most cat school witchers were elves, you know. All we have to do is keep to our creed, no matter the history. Letho might not have known it, but Roy did. He knew that humans did come from other continents, and most of the human settlements like Vizima and Novigrad were built upon the ruins of elven civilization. However, elves, or to be precise, Ainside, were also beings of another world. They came to the present land and killed the natives and ruled the land for a long time. If they wanted to be more precise, the dwarves and gnomes were the real natives of the land, but they were forced to hide in a remote corner of a mountain range. Oh, the Mahakams used to be a part of the elves' kingdom too. I can see why an elven hidden room would show up here. Roy guessed, maybe an elven sorcerer with a grudge made this room to keep the historical records to make sure everyone who came later would know about the evil humans had done. Letho nodded, but then shook his head. That's not all there is to it. This sorcerer's goal isn't to keep history intact. Look here. Letho pushed himself up and knocked on the wall, and then he pushed his hand against it and murmured. A moment later, the winds howled in the room. Roy looked closely and saw the mural destroyed by Ard, and when the dust had settled, something hidden was revealed. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 79. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 79. Child of the Sun, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, a mini plantation was behind the mural, and 10 bizarre plants stood there. They were more than 2 feet tall, and their petals were purple and their leaves green. They radiated life and nature, and Roy noticed a lot of wilted plants on the land beside the plants. Roy was overwhelmed by the urge to pluck the plants just by looking at them. He approached them and took a whiff, and then he felt refreshed, as if his whole body just went through a baptism session. Now I want them even more. Child of the Sun. Alternate names. Devil's Tail, Finud, Dwarf's Affine. Legends say a great elven archer once pierced the sun with his arrow, and the land absorbed the crimson liquid that rained from the sky. When the sun's blood came into contact with a dent on a rock, a magical plant came into existence. This is an extremely rare herb that possesses incredible effects. Perennial plant age. 52 years old. Habitat. Mahakams, Tir Tochair, Dragon Mountains, mine caves, or abandoned mines. Usages. Can be used in the creation of beauty pills. Cures any blemishes or ailments of the skin. Guaranteed beautification, can be used in the creation of antidotes. Neutralizes all poison and venom, will cause an unknown but beneficial change in the body if 5 ounces are consumed. Child of the Sun. Roy mumbled its name in confusion. He might have read a lot of the Witcher world's lore, but he wasn't omniscient. The plant he was seeing right before his eyes was something he'd never encountered before. Observe didn't provide him enough details, so he didn't know anything about the positives and the negatives of the plant. However, he had a guess that the plant might not have been native to the world he was in. The clue was in the blood that rained from the sun in the last mural. He postulated that the plant came from another world and the elves tore into their world with their ship. Have you seen this plant before? Letho was surprised that Roy knew what the plant was called. My notes don't have this in it. Roy kept quiet, and Letho stopped asking. He knew Roy had a lot of secrets of his own, and then he hunkered down and brushed his hand against the leaf of the nearest plant. The leaf chirped in surprise and retracted itself, sticking against the stem, causing it to bend backward, as if scalded by Letho's touch. Roy said, whether by appearance, reaction to stimuli, or place of growth, they are exactly as told in the legends. Maybe this is Child of the Sun. Be careful. Letho pulled Roy's hand away from the plant. Don't ruin this. It's priceless. Roy looked puzzled, so Letho hobbled around the plant and explained, my mentor, Ivar Evil, told me that there are a few magical plants in this world that are sought after by royalty, sorcerers, and witchers, but most of them have only appeared in historical records or legends. Almost nobody has ever seen them in the flesh, and Child of the Sun is one of those plants. Letho turned around to observe the bizarre plant. Child of the Sun is the main ingredient in Divine Beauty and Omnipotent Antidote, two of the top potions in the alchemy world, but the recipe is lost. Letho's interest was piqued. No poison can go up against the Omnipotent Antidote, not even our schools. It can also neutralize ancient curses. If someone had taken this to Temeria 8 years ago, they could have probably lifted the curse on Princess Ada and married her before that wolf school witcher. Child of the Sun can even break Astriga's curse. Roy finally understood the plant's power. Anyone who has a divine beauty can regain their youth. Letho looked astonished. And they can retain it until the day they die. And divine beauty can extend their lifespan too. So I take this as valuable. Valuable. It's priceless. Letho was reminded of yet another bad memory. An overwhelming majority of women are obsessed with youth. They'd kill if it meant they could regain it. Roy was disappointed though, since both of those products were useless to him, and the recipes had been lost in time. He held one of the plants in his right hand and squeezed it. The plant squirmed around in his palm, chirping in displeasure, not unlike a young lady who was being harassed. Letho was disgruntled at how Roy was hurting the priceless plant. What are you doing, boy? Testing it out. Roy licked his lips. The pill and antidote are useless to me anyway, since I'm going to be a witcher soon, but we have 10 Childs of the Sun here. His eyes were gleaming with desire. I don't think having one is too much to ask, and I'll bet you have the same desire, no? Roy was going for the change he would experience after ingesting 5 ounces of the plant. It's a good change. The elf on the mural shot the sun and grew the plants with its essence, so Roy thought the plants must have had a strong, unknown power. His body was urging him to swallow it. Every cell was screaming out its desire for the plant, as if eating it was a feral instinct, not unlike how a lost traveler would act when coming across an oasis in the desert. Roy wasn't doing it recklessly either. If anything bad were to happen, he would level up at will and heal using full recovery. Thanks to that, Roy had the courage to ingest it without worry. You're desiring it, boy. Are you sure you aren't hallucinating? Letho was perplexed, since he didn't feel any desire to consume the plant. I have to warn you that our school doesn't know much about Child of the Sun, so nobody knows if you'll get hurt if you eat it. You might die, or worse, get cursed. You'd better think this through. I suggest you clear out your pocket to keep these babies so we can take them with us, Letho said. Trust me, Letho. This isn't going to be a problem, Roy promised. And even if something goes wrong, I can deal with it. Roy had made his decision, and he uprooted a whole Child of the Sun. The plant stopped chirping the moment it was taken out, and it lolled to the side, as if it had fainted. Eddie when he looked at the remaining plants, they screeched and covered the petals with their leaves, as if trying not to look at the villain who was about to kill them. I feel guilty for some reason. Roy didn't act according to that guilt, for he wiped the dirt from the phenid he'd plucked, and popped it into his mouth. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. Chapter 80. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 80. Change, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, HM. The texture's nice. He bit through the leaves and stem easily, and a sweet juice filled his mouth as he munched on the plant. Delightfully light and sweet. Roy tasted something else after finishing the whole plant, the sweetness of blood. It lingered in his mouth for a while before disappearing. Roy frowned and wiped the juice from the corner of his lips, and then he saw striking crimson on his finger. It was warm, just like human blood. His frown deepened. It felt like I just gobbled something that was alive. He closed his eyes to feel the change in his body. A strange warmth coursed through him, but it waned after a moment. Roy certainly felt something within him, but it wasn't enough to cause a change. Nothing changed in his stats or job, though a line with a vague green hue showed up in his skill sheet. Roy could see the outline of words, but they were blinking, threatening to disappear at any time. A new skill is forming. It can't settle down because I didn't ingest enough. Roy confirmed the fact he had to ingest 5 ounces to see the change. I'll just eat more of it then. But I can't take them all. Gotta leave some for Letho. He uprooted another child of the sun, but Letho didn't stop him. Instead, he arched an eyebrow and leaned against the wall, planning to see what Roy had in mind. Roy ate another phenud, and another, and another, and another. Once he was done with the 5th, Roy stopped eating. Then he sat down in a meditation stance and felt the changes in his body. His brows and lips were trembling as the child of the sun released an enormous heat wave throughout his body. His blood-caked face, neck, and forearms were turning scarlet, as if Roy were being baked in an oven. The heat rushed to his brain, turning into thousands and thousands of lines of ancient text. He saw thousands of characters in his head, but he didn't recognize most of them, for he'd never learned that kind of alphabet. Everything was alien to him, though he could see they were rustic, ancient, even. Only a few were similar to the common speech he'd learned in the House of Cardell. To be exact, common speech was a derivative of the weird language he was seeing in his head. He was in a trance for God knew how long, and eventually, his soul memorized all the words he saw in his mind, including their pronunciations, the way to write them, and even their meanings. Roy had mastered a language just like that. Is this an ancient language? Roy snapped out of his trance, and his instincts told him his guess was on the money. The language he'd just mastered was ancient speech, the one elves used. But how'd I manage to do that? Is it because of the plant I ate? He turned to his character sheet and saw something surprising. You have ingested a sufficient amount of Child of the Sun. You now possess the talent of the Ain-El race. You have mastered ancient speech through the legacy of your bloodline. You have unlocked a skill. Elegance of the Wind, passive. Elves possess extraordinarily elegant looks and great dexterity. Charisma +1, dexterity +1. Charisma. 5-6 dexterity. 5.16.1 foot. I can't believe a few plants just changed my bloodline. So I'm not a human anymore. Well, not fully, at least. Otherworlders like him didn't mind their bloodlines. He wasn't scared about becoming a witcher, so being an elf meant nothing to him. Now I'm an elf, so what? At least I'm not a dwarf or a gnome. That would have been a shocker. And I got 2 attribute points for free. He read through his character sheet again and saw that he wasn't an Ain-side elf, unlike the ones residing in the Witcher world. Instead, he was an Ain-El elf from another world. The elves shared a complex relationship, but he knew that Ciri, the Blessed Girl, managed to travel through time and space thanks to her ancient bloodline, and the source of that was the elves of Ain-El. Will it be possible to gain a space-time skill with this bloodline then? He shook his head and smiled. That's too far-fetched for now. I'll put it aside. Letho had been watching Roy quietly, and he noticed the slight changes in Roy's air and face. Roy's face had turned fairer and glossier. Not even the dried blood could cover it, and his ears seemed to grow longer and pointier, though he'd have missed it if he hadn't looked closer. When Roy opened his eyes again, Letho could see a galaxy in them. He's more conspicuous than before. How do you feel, boy? Great. Roy leaped up and stretched his arms before doing a backflip. I feel more flexible and balanced. And I mastered ancient speech. Ancient speech. Letho observed him. Your looks have changed a bit too after eating those plants. Where in particular? Roy touched his cheeks, nose, eyes, and lips, but he felt nothing different. I'll have to get a mirror. You look more sculpted now, and your ears got a bit pointy. That's how a typical part.elf looks like. And then realization struck Letho. I see. Child of the Sun is one hell of an invention. It can even change a human into a part.elf, he mocked. Humans toppled their rule, and they came up with a plant that could turn humans into elves. That was a good plan, I'll have to admit, but since they couldn't mass-produce them, it failed. You probably mastered ancient speech through the legacy of your bloodline. Letho stopped for a moment to look at Roy. You might just become something big, boy. Most part.elves are. Part.elves were born when either one parent was half.elf, or both of them were. Part.elves were more human-like than half.elves, so they didn't look very much like elves. Thanks to that, they could blend in with humans easily. Only extreme racists would discriminate against them on the grounds that they weren't humans. Yennefer of Vengerberg, Faka who caused bloodbaths in the Northern Empires, and Vernon Ryan, the revolutionist leader, were all part.elves. I'd rather you not joke that way, Letho. Roy was worried about something else. Can part.elves undergo the trial? Don't worry. That's not a problem at all. In fact, being part.elf can be a boon, Letho said. You'll have a drastically extended lifespan. I'd say you'll live until 120 or 30 if you don't get into accidents or have any terminal illnesses. Roy thought about it silently. Is that the benefit of being a half-blood? Since it's good for you, why don't you finish the rest? They're useless now since the recipes for the meds have been lost in time. Not like we would have any use for them even if they could be made. Witchers usually looked like they were in their mid-30s or 40s for a century or two. Most didn't even get that far in life, since battles would claim them earlier than a natural death would. That made divine beauty redundant. Witchers had a high resistance to poison, and that made omnipotent antidote useless. Letho hesitated slightly before uprooting the chirping plants, and then he feasted on them. However, much to their surprise, nothing changed even after he ate 4 of them, whereas Roy had felt a surge of warmth after having a single plant. Child of the Sun didn't do anything to Letho. I wonder why. The mutation, perhaps. Roy mumbled. Witchers technically weren't humans anymore, since their organs and genes mutated after the trial. Maybe the change only works on humans. Letho noticed it and stopped eating. Instead, he asked Roy to keep the last one in his inventory space. I wonder if that sorcerer would kill us if he found out what we did to his Phoenix farm. Roy put Letho's arm around his shoulder and moved forward with painstaking effort. Highly unlikely. It had been more than 10 years since the barrier had been strengthened, so it had been weak. The sorcerer is probably dead, Letho answered. That sorcerer put in a lot of effort to make that room, but we reaped the rewards in the end. Is this also fate? Child of the Sun had another hidden effect that was only made known that night when Roy meditated. It was the first time he meditated after his bloodline change, and compared to the shallow meditation that only healed him, the meditation this time took him deeper into the zone, making him come into contact with the truth of the world. Roy's consciousness entered a densely dark zone, the novelty reminding him of his first mediation. The air around him was almost viscous, and he could see ripples that tied his consciousness down, stopping him from moving around. Then, a small flame ignited in the darkness. It was far, far away from Roy, and a single breath would be enough to extinguish it. However, it was resilient, and it approached Roy bit by bit, the astounding heat and destruction within it getting more pronounced with each passing second. And then a yellow light appeared. It was stable and anchoring, just like the earth. Then a green one moved around nimbly, just like the wind, and finally, a blue one that calmed and soothed him, just like water. Water, earth, fire, and air. The four elements were closing in on him. If Roy's soul had tentacles, he would have tried to grasp the elements. The elements were just teasing him though. They swirled around him and took a whiff before disappearing into the dark. No, Roy almost stopped his meditating state, but he clung on and held on to the minuscule elements around him. He could feel the elements trying to touch him, to dance and talk to him, but they seemed shy and hesitant. Stay! Roy roared silently, but that shocked them, and the last of the elements slipped away into the darkness, despite Roy's protests. Damn it! Roy ended his meditation, looking frustrated. Just a little bit more. Just a bit more and I could have grasped them. However, he had a feeling he could build a connection with the elements as long as he mediated and kept trying. Maybe I can even unlock my mana pool before going through the trial. But at least this is an improvement. Child of the Sun did change his bloodline for the better. Roy had been absolutely talentless at magic before, but now, he had a bit of a chance to connect with the elements after ingesting the plants. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released.